This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we are with Reed Dent to reflect on the most famous wrestling match in the Bible.
Wow. That's a setup.
Of all time? Can we say of all time?
No, not of all time.
No?
No, I don't know what would be.
That's what I'm saying. What else would be?
Probably something with Hulk Hogan.
I didn't realize we were big tent wrestling here. I thought we were talking, actual wrestling.
Wait, so you think this story about Jacob is actual wrestling?
Well, I mean, it seemed like he was working pretty hard.
Yeah.
I think he put his all into it.
It's definitely the most famous wrestling match in the Bible. There's no question about that. In fact, name another wrestling match in the Bible.
Yeah, sure.
If you say wrestling in Bible and it's Family Feud, there will be one answer, and it's Jacob, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Survey says, boy, this is a far cry from the cold open of your last series, Reed.
Well, that was all crafted, and this is like, we're just reflecting on our pillars here. We're going through some pillars. I was thinking, what do we mean when we say wrestling? Because, the other pillars, it feels a little bit, even if we're defining, discipleship, but wrestling is I was thinking about how I did the whole wrestling thing when I was younger and how it feels different to me now that I'm a little bit older. I'm 42. I'm in middle age. If you had said wrestling with God to me 20 years ago, I probably would have only thought about theology and ideas about God. And that's totally valid. And we're going to talk about that. What I'm going to call brain wrestling. There's it's engaging, the intellect, the mind, the brain. But I think the way that I have come to see wrestling more and more is more at a soul level, wrestling with God, which hopefully the distinction, it's not that those things aren't related, or it's not that they're unrelated. They definitely are, but the distinction will hopefully become a little clearer. But the way I want to talk about what I think about wrestling is just by doing some reflection. Brent, and when we were talking before recording, said, should we call this an examination? I would not call this an examination of the passage, the story about Jacob wrestling with God or the man, or we did the reboot episode on that, Marty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did.
Yeah, that was a good conversation. So if people are interested in a more thorough kind of line by line, then that would be the place to go. But when I was reading it again, because honestly, I didn't know where to really begin in thinking about what I want to say about wrestling. So I just went back to that story, and there were a handful of phrases that just kind of popped out to me that were it's more like if I'm journaling on wrestling, this is not me trying to teach the point of the passage or something, but just what I'm getting out of some of these phrases that stood out to me. So I just want to talk through some of those.
Almost more in the spirit of the things that are popping out like you would think in Lectio Divina rather than historical critical grammar.
Yeah, more of an imaginative reading, what's just kind of personally what is God bringing to mind as these phrases and words kind of hit me.
Yeah.
So Brent, can you read the story and then we'll just talk through a few phrases? I don't think this is, it's dangerous saying this. I don't think this is going to be a very super long episode. So we're going to be more in the old school of Bema, where it was a neat half hour. We'll see.
God sits in his heavens and he laughs.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Brent, let's hear it.
That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go, unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared."
When I think about wrestling, which another way of, some other ways I would try to describe what that means when it comes to, it involves a lot of asking questions, a lot of also, yelling into the void, yelling at God, the questions that have to do with who is God? And when that feels like that's changing, or what about the text? And how do I read the text? And what does that mean? And just questions that sort of end up reorienting or paradigm shifting that can be kind of uncomfortable. This is what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about wrestling. And what struck me in reflecting on this story was right at the beginning there, where it says that Jacob was left alone. And it says that he sends off, his wives, his servants, his sons, and even all of his possessions. And so Jacob is there literally like just stripped bare, not like naked, but just has nothing with him. And I think about the times that wrestling with these questions of who God is and also who I am and all of that kind of stuff, this resonated with me because I think there is a time where we have to kind of go out to the end of ourselves. I have to go out to the end of myself. I have to be willing to go to the end of what I think I have settled in my mind, what I know. This is who God is. This is what this passage means. This is what life is about. This is what my life is about. And this can be like a very uncomfortable place to be, even before the wrestling match really begins, right? Like to be in this place of, that feeling where a question comes or a realization comes and you start to think, okay, well, where will that lead me? And if that leads me to a new belief or a new idea, then where will that lead me? Because sometimes it feels like being willing to ask the question, and these uncomfortable questions can arise, where what we want to do is we want to turn and we want to run away. It's like, I'm going to go back. I'm going to retreat from the banks of the river here. I'm going to take my family, my servants, my possessions, and I'm just going to go back to where I came from, and I'm going to stay there because the safety of that place is comforting. It's comfortable, right? And here I'm thinking about the safety of consensus, because I think one of the things that's kind of anti-wrestling is I'm just going to blindly accept everything I was ever told. And then if I don't question it, I just accept it, find a way to store those questions away somewhere that I don't hear them anymore. I shut them behind a door. That's comfortable, right? But the questions can feel like falling down a well or something, where it's like, okay, how deep does this really go? And yeah, so for people who feel that opening up and that sense of like aloneness, I know that it is uncomfortable, but I think there is some place for saying, okay, this is something that I, within my own self at least, have to go and face to some extent alone or without the safety of all of those things that are very comfortable to me. I think part of the way this has looked for me too is not just in the questions, but in the ways that I try to seek answers in wrestling that I have learned. I'm actually reading this book right now called Make Your Home in This Luminous Dark by James K.A. Smith. Are you guys familiar with him? His philosopher?
Yeah, familiar with him. And I've been told about that book a couple times. Yep.
Yeah. And he talks about when we go to new places with God, is how I'll say it, in that uncomfortable space where we kind of have to acknowledge what we don't know. He says one of the things that's helpful is actually to engage with different kinds of expression or communication or things that teach, but like not in the normal, straightforward, analytical, logical way, like a very sort of pedagogic, like I'm going to teach you a lesson and break it down in these parts. It's like the kind of Western thing we talk about a lot, where it's like, here's step A, then step B, but intentionally engaging with things that are communicating about the questions that I'm asking about God, about myself, but not in a way that's straightforward, that feels actually difficult to understand, where you walk away from it and you're like, somebody's like, well, what was that about? Like, what did that mean? And I'm like, I'm not really sure, but I've found value in that feeling of, man, what's it like? It's like a little bit disorienting, but I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think sometimes encounters with God can really be disorienting. And maybe that's another way of talking about wrestling, is like dropping the expectation that like every encounter I have with God is going to be clean and comfortable or even necessarily uplifting, but sometimes it is a little bit disorienting. And the one place I wanted to push back here, though, like, because I was thinking, okay, are we always meant to wrestle alone then? And I think the answer to that has to be no, right? But I don't think it can only be in community. Like I put the gift of the tag team, right? Like I've got a buddy I can tag in with me and ask the questions together. And I think part of wrestling that's so important is like having that person or those people where whatever your question is that feels difficult or uncomfortable, that those people will be there and they will honor that discomfort without trying to bulldoze it and be like, oh, well, here's the answer.
Yeah.
Or will make you feel like something might be wrong with you for asking that question. You know, like you need those people. But I think it can't only ever be done with your friend sitting next to you. You know, like it's this idea of like Jesus going out to the desert, right? And like he's got to be alone for a while, or even not even just at the beginning of his ministry, but the various places in the Gospels where it says he would withdraw to lonely places and pray. And I think this is where some really important meatiness of that wrestling match about who is God and who am I, where that happens is, man, it takes courage, but we got to be unafraid to be alone like Jacob was here.
And it's the reality for sure. Even if and I'm not even sure I would say it's always the intent that we wouldn't wrestle alone. It is certainly like, I think about this passage. It's not that Jacob was stripped by anybody else. He sent them across the river.
Yeah.
How many times do we in our kind of self-pity or whatever it is as we head into this dark night of the soul, we force ourselves into this lonely, solitary place. And maybe it is the right place. I'm not saying it's always wrong, but he's stripped himself to where it's only him left alone. And that's usually what I've done when I find myself in these spots. Probably would have been healthier if I would have had a tag team friend or had a community. But in my self-righteous whatever, or my self-pity, or I have often forced myself out into my own deserts. And God's like, all right, well, you've done this to yourself. I'll meet you here.
That's such an interesting way of thinking about it. And I do think that there could be something to that, you know, this is in a sense like he's made difficulty for himself here, maybe. But I also wonder, like, would this encounter have happened if everybody had stayed with him? You know,
yeah.
Is this mysterious God man figure, shadowy guy? Like, is he going to show up if everybody's around, you know?
Right.
I wonder about the timeline of this because he sent them over, he sent over the possessions. So he was left alone and a man wrestled with him. Like, is this like they get out of the water, they turn around, they wave, and then they turn their back on him and start walking, and then like all of a sudden he's wrestling? Or is this like kind of what Marty talks about in the creating a space thing where he got challenged to go off and sit for hours? And it's like, by the time you get to the 5th hour, some things start to happen, but it took some time. Like, was he sitting there, like really like experiencing the loneliness? And if so, why?
Yeah.
Why was he just there the whole time? I don't know.
Yeah. And I like, Reed, you bringing up, you know, Jesus is driven to the desert alone. This is the design. This is the intent that he would be in this space. Elijah, Moses. They're driven by the Spirit. They're pulled out by God into this solitary space because the thing that needs to happen can only happen in that space. I think that's a really, really great point.
Yeah, I think there was a version of me earlier in my life where I would have done anything just to have anybody around, and that being alone would have been like the worst thing that could happen to me, you know?
Yeah.
So I think whether I have sent them off because I was being foolish or whether I have been driven there by the Spirit into the desert, like that, there's a word here, I think, that in our wrestling, like being alone is not the worst thing that can happen to you. And in fact, maybe at times a necessary condition for God being able to encounter us the way that God wants to encounter us, that we can't always be just like clinging to the coattails of everyone around us, you know, that we may have to come face to face with God ourselves. The next line that I want to reflect on for a minute is where Jacob is told, you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. And at one level, I mean, this is obviously like the story of Jacob's life. His whole life is just struggling with other humans, struggling with his family. But I think this is the Lectio side of it for me, is in realizing, like in my theological journey, it was really helpful actually to come across this line and realize that some of my wrestling is actually not with God.
Sure.
My wrestling is with people. And that there is a difference between, and I don't know that I can always tell the difference, but I think there is a difference between wrestling with God and then with what everybody is saying about God.
Yeah.
Or what people are presenting as God, you know? This is where I want to talk a little bit about the distinction between like sort of the brain wrestling and the soul wrestling.
Sure.
Because like when it comes to wrestling with people, there is like a brain level wrestling in my life with God when it comes to other people that is like just the re-examining of how people interpret scripture or what the doctrines are that we were handed or the traditions or even the proclamations by the preacher in the pulpit, you know, or by the denomination at large. And they say, this is what it is. And that to wrestle is to just struggle with those things and that it's not bad. It doesn't make you like some kind of a theological criminal to be like, yeah, I don't know about that. Let me ask some more questions. And what I have found, and I'm sure I've said this on the podcast before, that would have been definitely a shock to my 20-year-old self, is that sometimes in wrestling with those doctrines and traditions and interpretations, sometimes the truth is hard because it's not what I've always been taught, but sometimes it's hard because it is what I've always been taught. Sometimes when you wrestle, you find out like, oh, other people do know what they're talking about. And the church has been onto something real and true here.
Yeah.
I think there is a fear, though, that wants to stop us from asking those questions in the first place or getting into that ring, right? Which is what I was saying a second ago. It feels like falling down a well. Or actually, it feels to me, and I have these conversations with college students all the time, and I feel like sometimes my job is not to answer the question for them, but just to reassure them, to comfort and say, if you keep going with this question, like you'll be okay.
Yeah.
Everything's not going to collapse. I recently preached at a church about the parable of the Good Samaritan. I was reminded of a line from, was it Crossan, who said that a parable is like an earthquake opening up the ground at your feet. And this is what I feel like sometimes it begins when we start asking these questions, it feels like the ground's opening up. Mm-hmm. But what I have found, I remember years ago, came across this geological phenomenon called a cenote, which is like there's a hole in the ground and it looks like, you know, it's just like a pit that's opened up that you would want to avoid. But if you go down into that, what you find is like these amazing kind of underground pools of water that are like, you can swim in there, you can go on vacations and go into these things. And people like scuba dive in them. And there's like all kinds of cool, like marine wildlife in them. But I think that's like the image rather than falling down a well, because that just feels like, well, you're going to get to the bottom of the well and you're going to be trapped, you know? But like, what if it's something like, at beginning this wrestling match with the human traditions that I've been giving and I go down, what if what's behind the questions is actually something even better that feels scary at first? That's the kind of brain wrestling, which I think a lot of our listeners are going to be very familiar with. But thinking too about the soul wrestling, which is a lot less to do with like humans in the sense of like what I have been taught, and a lot more to do with wrestling with what God, what the way of Jesus calls me to, with how I relate to other people and how I regard them, which is not like a philosophical question. It's not a theological question, but it's just like, oh, when I pray, forgive us as we forgive those who trespass against us. Or when Jesus says, love your enemies or bless those who persecute you, you know, or thinking again about the Good Samaritan and like the question of like, well, who is my neighbor? That this is a wrestling kind of question that is not like there's some, I think the point of these soul level wrestling questions is not that there's some like profound answer that I'm going to come to. It's just that like in wrestling, I think I have to wrestle to be able to follow the way of Jesus like more sincerely and more wholeheartedly. That if I think it's just a matter of like, oh yeah, like love your enemies, like that's pretty simple. Like if I'm treating it that way and I'm not wrestling with it, then I'm probably not going to the depth of like that call that I'm being asked to go to. And so, yeah, wrestling with not just what I think, but with, I guess, how I end up living. Also, you struggled not just with humans, but with God. And I like it here where Jacob says, please tell me your name.
Oh, yeah. That
he's been wrestling with this guy and it doesn't even actually, he doesn't even realize, he doesn't know who it is.
Right.
He doesn't, he's just a guy, you know? And this is maybe a point that's worth considering is that like anything that feels like wrestling maybe we're wrestling with God and we don't even know it yet. But again, there is like the brain level of wrestling with God, which is like the stuff I love to do in Bible study, thinking about God as like a character in the Bible, thinking about God even as like a theological idea, which none of us can avoid doing, but asking questions like, who is God? And why does God do this? Or why doesn't God do that? You know, those kinds of questions is like, and again, those can be scary questions, but I think this is something more familiar to people who are listeners to the podcast, like re-examining ideas about God is something we do a lot here. But when I say like how it's changed for me as I've gotten older, this soul level of wrestling with God, the struggle with God, I find the primary question is not why or who or what, but it's where. Where is God? It's not that I don't believe that God exists. It's like, you know, in Job, we've talked about this before, but I don't think Job's question was like, why are these bad things happening to me? I think Job's question is, where is God when these bad things are happening to me? Like, I know he's somewhere, but he's not here. Or the way the psalmists wrestle with God is never like, you know, it's not like the psalmist is enduring some kind of violence or some kind of mistreatment and is like, well, I don't know if God exists anymore. But it's like, why is God hiding his face from me? The question of God's existence is not the wrestling question that the Bible writers are asking. You know, that's a more modern question for us, I think.
Well, I like the marriage of that and this story. You know, we've always pointed out before, like, well, is it a man or is it an angel or is it God?
Yeah.
And as Jacob looks back on the story, not just back on, but as he like what he finds, I like the where, how you frame that. I found God in this encounter. Whatever it was, man, angel, I'll tell you what I found in it. I found the divine encounter in this experience I had last night and whatever that was. Like that was, I found God in that space and not in just a poetic, like, oh, I found God. But I mean, like I encountered the divine in a transformative way.
Yeah. And that sometimes in my life, there are times where it's like, I really need that encounter or I really want that encounter and God is not there.
Right.
Or I don't feel that God is there. I don't experience God there.
Right.
You know, and so it's like, where are you? And just being able to, I think for me, what wrestling has looked like there is like, it looks like Psalm type stuff where I'm trying to like keep myself in the ring, even when it feels like I'm the only one in the ring, you know, and I'm going to keep seeking, I'm going to keep praying, even when it's like, you know, the ring is empty. There's nobody in the stands. It's just me here, you know, but the insistence of like, I'm going to stay here until something happens. And that something is not, I don't think always necessarily what I am looking for or what I want it to be. But yeah, I think more and more the struggle is like Job is like, man, I don't even need an answer. I just need presence. And I'm having a hard time experiencing that right now. And that's what wrestling, yeah, that's what it looks like a lot of times for me.
Well, I like your insistence too on the brain soul distinction. The more you keep bringing it, circling back to that, the more I keep thinking about how often what I'm needing to do is a soul wrestling, and I keep trying to satisfy it with a brain wrestling. Like, here's this invitation to us, and I keep like, well, if I just figure it out on the brain level, if I just do the brain wrestling, it will somehow substitute for this other thing that can't be done on that level. Yeah.
I know if Elle were here right now, she would point out to me that this is like classic Enneagram 5.
Sure.
This is like what I do.
Right.
But funnily enough, I find myself giving this counsel to people. Like I'm thinking about when I've had concentrated time with Bema folks, like on the Israel and the Turkey trips. And like we'll get into, I've had some beautiful conversations with people where they're wanting to like do the thing, the Bema thing, right? And like, oh, well, what about this passage? And what about that? And what about the context here? And I'm like, those are all fine things and we should ask those questions, but it seems like you're avoiding something else here. Like, and it's like, let's talk about you. Let's talk about like your kids. Let's talk about your marriage. Let's talk about, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
because you get a sense, and I do it too. And there's no condemnation at all, because it's like, yeah, I am actually using God to avoid God right now. I'm using the idea of God to avoid the real presence of God.
Oof. Yeah.
I would also add to this, like, so we're still on, you have struggled with God and with humans. And I would add to wrestle, a big part of wrestling is just wrestling with my own self.
Yeah.
Which I think actually is a little bit in this passage when the man asks him, what is your name?
Oh, huge in this passage. Absolutely. Not even a little bit. Such a big, yeah, absolutely.
Well, and you know, we know the significance of names and names being changed in the Bible and like this idea of identity. And yeah, just a big part of wrestling is like not stopping asking the question, who am I and what am I doing here? Even as I have gotten older, you know? And I think there's like a posture that I feel a little bit more settled, a little bit more stable. Like I have a better idea who I am and what I'm doing here, but not stopping asking that question and actually like not stopping allowing myself to change, and that like continuing to just wonder about, how am I growing and how will I be different at 50 than I am at 40 or maybe at 60? And I hope that, like, I remember having a conversation with a student one time, bless his soul, but he was like, well, my goal in preaching is like, when I preach a sermon at 25, I want to be able to preach the exact same sermon like when I'm 65 and not think anything different. And I'm like, really? That's what you want? Like,
bummer.
What? Why would you want to keep living after that? Like, what, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But again, like, there is a lot of uncomfortable is the word that I keep coming back to again and again.
Yeah.
And being able to like hang in there in that discomfort, because, you know, so it says in the passage where it says, you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. And there's part of me that's like, cool for you, Jacob. Like, you overcame, but I don't know that I always feel like I'm overcoming in these wrestling matches, you know? Like, there are times where it's like, I'm not prevailing here. I still feel as uncomfortable, as strained, as tied into a pretzel, like God's got me in some kind of suplex move or something. And I think the encouragement is like, do I have the courage and the trust to stay in the ring and keep wrestling? Which for me, a lot of times looks like saying, I don't know. Like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what this means. I don't have an answer for that. And that's, you know, Enneagram 5 self is like, I want to have answers. And so discomfort wrestling is like, I don't know the answer, which can be a difficult place for our pastoring friends and our teaching friends to be, because I know the feeling of expectation of like, man, when that person in your congregation asks that question, like, you need to have an answer for them. And my own wrestling match though, but we're people too. We got to be able to wrestle too, right? It's not like we're just like, we've ascended to the top of the mountain and, you know, we know everything to tell them. There are times where it's like, yep, not overcoming, haven't overcome yet.
Or at least the overcoming is not, it's not emerging from this thing washed, clean, victorious. It is still being there. It is in the middle of, you know, sitting on the stool in the middle of the rounds and whatever. I don't know. There's something. You made it, like you didn't. This did not do you in. You come out even more of a mess, limping, whatever, but this is not done you in. Yeah,
I mean, like I said, the next line that I don't have a ton of thoughts on, but where he says, I saw God face to face and yet my life was spared. Mm. Like, maybe for him, overcoming looks like I'm still here.
Yes.
I made it through.
Yes. Right.
And I did the thing I wasn't supposed to be able to do, actually.
Yep.
Because nobody can see God, right? And live is what we're told. And Jacob seems as surprised as anybody. Like, man, I saw God face to face. Which, importantly, as you pointed out before, Marty, Jacob did not seem to be aware of this at the time. In reflection, he's like, oh, that was God. And I was face to face with God even, and I wasn't even aware that was going on. But now I see, like, oh, in my wrestling in this season of discomfort, in this season of struggle, in this season of disappointment, I was actually in the ring face to face with God, and I was spared. I made it through. I did what I didn't think I could do, what I didn't think could be done.
I feel like the end of this passage, and part of this is like, is this my interpretation of it, or is this actually what Jacob was feeling? But the end of it just feels like there's so much clarity here. The way it reads, it's like, as soon as the guy blesses him and leaves, he's just like kind of deer in the headlights, but also just like, oh, I just saw God face to face. It feels like the clarity came that quickly. even though this seems like it's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, as he's walking for the next days and weeks and months, like he's reflecting on it. It's like, oh, I saw God face to face in that thing. But it feels so clear versus the beginning where it's like, I don't really know how to read that. Like, was he left alone? Part of me wants him to be like, he was left alone and then just like, boom, surprise. He's in a wrestling match and he doesn't care who it is. He's going to overcome. He's wrestled with God and with humans and he's overcome. He overcomes every time. He's undefeated. It doesn't matter. He asks for the name after the fact.
And he doesn't get the name.
He doesn't even get the name, but he doesn't even think to ask until it's basically over. And then he's like, oh, okay, I'm just not, he doesn't want to give up. And it just feels so like he's just got this tight fist clenching onto this idea of like he has to overcome everything.
Yeah.
And then at the end, it just feels so much more clear. Like, oh,
yeah,
I saw God face to face and God spared me. Like I didn't have anything to do with it.
I sense some change. I think it's really interesting that in Jacob's wrestling here, he doesn't get an answer to his question. And that the wrestling match actually begins with a question about himself, right? So the beginning of it is an interrogation of like, do I know who I am? God wants to know who I am. It's such an interesting response too, because what Jacob is after is a blessing. He's grappling on. Jacob's the one that won't let go. And he wants a blessing. And the man's response is, what is your name? Which is like, maybe part of my wrestling is I want something. Maybe I think I deserve something. And it's not that I don't know God well enough so much as it is I don't understand myself well enough. That's the question. God is like, okay, you say you want a blessing. Who are you? And that at the end of the story, which is a very short story, by the way, when Jacob says, please tell me your name, I love that the man asks, why do you ask my name? And then that's it. He blesses him and exits like stage left. And we don't know. And it's in reflection that he's like, okay, I saw God face to face. This actually feels to me like it's starting to feel Road to Emmaus to me, which is, I mean, a lot of things feel that way to me, but where they don't know who he is. And then as soon as they recognize him, he vanishes. And then they're like, didn't our hearts burn within us? I saw him face to face, you know? But at the time that it was happening, like I wasn't even really sure that was going on. But yeah, I think just in Jacob's insistence, because he gets the blessing. We don't exactly know what that means here, but he gets a blessing. And to me, like Jacob's insistence, I won't let you go unless you bless me. There's a part of me that this can get all like, I mean, I grew up in a church that was kind of prosperity gospel-y. And I think this can get twisted out of shape.
Sure.
Where it ends up feeling very selfish, very self-seeking of like, I'm not going to let you go until I get a new car. But I do think that like at a deeper level, there is a blessing from God. There is a kind of intimacy, an impact from God that we are yearning for.
Yes.
That is right to yearn for. And that we ought to insist on. Like, I'm not going to stop until I get this. I mean, it says he was there till daybreak. He was going at this all night long. And just the endurance it takes, but it's driven by, and I think our wrestling must always like forever center on seeking and getting God, as opposed to like, I would be tempted to be like, what I want is knowledge. What I want is like some kind of mastery over something. And I'm going to wrestle until I become the best, you know, or something like that, or the smartest. But actually, I think what our wrestling ought to center on is I'm not letting go until I feel this intimacy from God. That is the blessing, right? The blessing is, he's face to face with them.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly, it like fakes like we're not going to know what the blessing is. It doesn't really tell us what it is, but it does.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, actually, in the context of what's happening here, Jacob is getting ready to go meet his brother. And I do think like, man, and there's a whole other discussion that could happen here. And I think we talked about this when we did the episode, right? Like he is on the precipice of this life-defining experience where he is going to be reconciled to his brother, and he's not ready for that yet. And there is this wrestling that has to happen before he can go over and experience this, which is going to come as a shock to him, right? Because he's going to be like, oh, something bad's going to happen. Yeah, and so what about that? It's not like I want to promise people like, oh, if you're wrestling, that means something great is about to happen or something like that. But only to say that like there is something coming that the wrestling is preparing him for this blessing, for this thing that God is going to do, which is going to be something that he doesn't expect. And reflects, I think, for Jacob too, and I feel like I'm a little bit in the weeds here, but reflects for Jacob a different value set, which is not about like all of the herds and flocks and, material things that he has gained, but it was actually about a reconciliation with the family.
Yeah, I'm sure he had an idea of what he was asking for when he said, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And there was that endurance you speak of. He is not going to let go until that, whatever you want to call that breakthrough, that moment, that encounter happens. The encounter is probably different than he anticipated, but he knows it when he gets it. And now it has opened him up to receive something that I don't think he could have received or processed without that encounter. And he doesn't know that at all in the moment. Like, I feel like he knows he had some divine encounter. I imagine he's still unbelievably disoriented about like, well, but what was that? And what is the blessing? And what am I supposed to take from that? But that puts him in a soft enough, an open enough place that when he bumps into his brother, that's like, you know what? We're good. And there's some forgiveness that it does a totally different work than if he would have never had that grappling match, would have never wrestled with his own identity, would have never opened himself up to what blessings could be and what they could look like. I just think that makes a whole bunch of sense in context to where he's at.
Yeah. So I think my last word then would just be to put a cap on it. For those who are listening who are oriented a little bit more like me, where what's being looked for, what's hoped for in wrestling, if we think of wrestling as like theological investigation or something and asking the hard questions, and like what we hope for, what we expect is like, I'm going to get answers about like, the nature of God or something. I would just say that like what the story resonates with me is that like what began as wrestling looking for better answers ended up becoming a surprising encounter of, oh man, I was face to face with God that whole time. God was not some answer that emerged at the end of my study, but in there with me as I was wrestling, feeling that discomfort, that stress, and also that presence that was there. And that what ultimately the wrestling is producing in me is not just like some smarter theologian or more accurate Bible reader, but somebody who is able to go into the world as the kind of partner and person that God wants me to be, that is a person of reconciliation, a person of peace. Yeah, and I think that's my last word on wrestling.
Yeah, you came in looking for better answers, but ended up leaving a better person.
Boom, there's the tagline.
Bam, baby.
Look at that. Package it.
Oh, it was really good. I like that. I think my brain automatically defaults to a much more shallower conversation about wrestling, and there's a much better thing that you've pulled us into here, so that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all a part of it, is how I would say it. I think it's all a part of it. The intellectual stuff, the soul stuff, yeah, the relational stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it feels like a fitting end to this 4 Pillars series, Marty.
Is this the last episode of our series?
This is the last one of the whole series, yeah.
Well, put a cap on it. There you go. Boom.
I don't know if you have any closing thoughts on the entirety of the series, Marty. If you want to, we've got a, Reed promised a short episode. I'd say we pretty much hit that mark.
Did we deliver?
Pretty close. A little longer than you maybe thought, but not bad. But we have a few minutes, Marty, if you want to give us something.
No, I think it is a really good fitting end. It's part of why I love to end on the pillar of wrestling when I talk about the 4 pillars anyway, because this is kind of where it needs to, this is the open end it needs to end on. And what Reed's reminded us of is I think often the Bema journey, the Bema community, the Bema experiment tends to lean towards very brain level wrestling, very intellectual, searching for answers, being okay with paradox, the deconstruction, and we can do all that and miss a much more. It is, as you said, a really fitting place to end this series of do not miss the greater work and the greater opportunity. Don't bail on the wrestling match. Don't let go before it's too early. demand that you find the thing that makes us into the people that Jesus is wanting us to become. I think that's a beautiful way to end this series and get on to the next. Is it L? Got some Book of Judges? What are we doing next, Brent?
Yeah, L's. Well, we've got a couple little things in between, of course, as we usually do for transition.
As we usually do.
But yes, the next series is the Women of Joshua and Judges.
All right. Well, a fitting transition. I like it.
Okay, well, listeners can find a couple of show notes. We got an old episode, Bema episode 14, if you want to go back and listen to our reboot version of Jacob's Wrestling. I've also got a link about a cenote, because I was like, what is that? And I looked that up. Marty, there's actually one in Ohio. It's just a few hours away from you.
All right. I'll go dive into this cenote.
It's our homework, is to go check these out.
Yeah. Did you link some J.K.A. Smith?
Oh, yeah. Make your home in this luminous dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'll get that in there too. Sure.
Pretty good. Pretty good small list of show notes.
You know me. I like to keep it compact.
Okay, well, anyway, all of those links will be in your podcast app or at BemaDiscipleship.com. On this episode page, I believe this is episode 510. You can use the website to get in touch with us. We have a new Bema events page that, like, you know, if you want to know what we're up to, we have like a cleaner way to check out what we're doing, where we're going to be, what's happening. But I would also just like to say thank you for all of you listeners who support the work that we do, who join us in this wrestling, and hopefully in the deeper ways of wrestling as well as the brain wrestling. We're so thankful for that. We're thankful for the financial support you provide. We're thankful for the stories that you send in and share with us of what God is doing in your life, what God is doing in your groups, in your communities, in your churches. We're so honored to be a part of this. So thank you for everyone who supports us in that work. And thank you for joining us on the Bema podcast today. We'll talk to you again soon.